So we're in your government book. We're in chapter 4. I like this part where Benjamin Franklin calls for prayer. So in the midst of the forming of our Constitution, there was much turmoil. And one that you would least expect, basically told everyone to go to God in prayer. And that was Benjamin Franklin. So Benjamin Franklin's call for prayer. Mr. President, the small progress we have made after 4 or 5 weeks of close attendance and continual reasonings with each other are different sentiments on almost every question, several of the last producing as many no's as a's is, methinks a melancholy proof of the imperfection of human understanding. We indeed seem to feel our own want of political wisdom, since we have been running about in search of it. We have gone back to ancient history for models of government and examined the different forms of those republics in which, having been formed with the seeds of their own dissolution, no longer exist. And we have viewed modern states all around Europe, but find none of their constitutions suitable to our circumstances. So if you look at that, what was he saying? He was saying, we're running around like a chicken with our head cut off. We're examining everything because we want to form this constitution, and there's nays and yeas and nothing is getting done. In this situation, he says, in this situation of this assembly, groping as it were in the dark to find political truth and scarce able to distinguish it when presented us, how has it happened, sir, that we have not hitherto once thought of humbly applying to the Father of lights to illuminate our understanding? In the beginning of the contest with Great Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily in prayer in this room for divine protection. Our prayers, sir, were heard, and they were graciously answered. All of us who were engaged in struggle must have observed frequent instances of superintending providence in our favor. To that kind of providence we owe this happy opportunity of consulting in peace on means of establishing our future national felicity. And have we now forgotten that powerful friend? Or do we imagine what we no longer need his assistance? So what was he saying here? He was saying, let's look back to the beginning, a decade ago when we were praying. We were on our knees for divine protection, and God heard our prayers miraculously. And we were all in one accord looking to that divine providence of God and God showing up. So what shall we do now? Is this any different now? He was saying that we put together our Constitution. We must go to God in prayer and in providence and trust him as we have done in our past. He says, I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings, that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. I firmly believe this, and I also believe that without his concerning aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. We shall be divided by our little partial local interests. Our projects will be confounded, and we ourselves shall become a reproach and byword down to the future ages. And what is worse, mankind may hereafter from this unfortunate instance despair of establishing governments by human wisdom and leave it to chance, war, and conquest. I therefore beg leave to move that henceforth prayers imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessings upon our deliberations be held in this assembly every morning. We proceed to business, and that one or more of the clergy in this city be requested to officiate in that service. So what was Benjamin Franklin calling? He was calling for prayer. That every morning they needed to pray every morning to seek God. And saying if we don't seek God and just seek man's ways, we'll be no better than the Tower of Babel in the Bible. That we will fall, that we will not have a firm foundation if we do not seek God in prayer. I love this because isn't it like we should start our mornings every day in prayer instead of have our days fall like the towers of Babel, as we focus on what God has for us to do, whether it be, in putting together the Constitution of the United States of America or putting together our life's call, is that we need to call to God for prayer and trust Him. Except the Lord build our house, we'll labor in vain. Not trust in the arm of flesh, but the arm of the Lord Jesus Christ. So that's on Benjamin Franklin. I wanted to go over that, and I had to read it because I was going to go over it. I thought I cannot tell you, what his call was totally about without reading his exact words. So now let's go back. I want to go back to, if I can here, James Madison, another profile on another believer, another Christian with Christian heritage, was James Madison, the father of our Constitution. So James Madison, he was small man, 5'6" small for a man, right? He lived in 1751 to 1836, and he was not a commanding figure at all. It's least to expect that he'd be a hero and the father of our Constitution. But behind his insignificant figure, he had a towering intellect. He served our country for over 42 of his 85 years. He drafted the Constitution and ratified it. So he put together the Constitution, ratifying it. He was a congressman from the state of Virginia. He also was the Secretary of State under the third president of Thomas Jefferson. So he was Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of State. And then on to become the 4th president of the United States of America. His political thought was summed in 3 words. What were these words? Constitution, constitutionalism. Number 2, republicanism, and federalism. So, explaining, and we have explained, constitutional, he was the former of our Constitution, and that Constitution to guide, to be our higher calling of our country in our Constitution. Republicanism is to have representatives from each of our colonies at that time, but now states. So each of our states and our new states coming, would be representative as republic. So we would have a republic. Constitution would be our form of government. Federalism would be that we would have a strong unity in our federal government, that our federal government would not be weak, but be strong enough at least to form an army need be. So 3 things. He believed in the Christian view of man. So what is the Christian view of man? The Christian view of man is that man is deprived. That man is sinful. He believed in the depravity of human nature, that human nature is corrupt. The heart of man is deceitfully wicked beyond measure. So in focusing on this, he knew that there should not be a central power that could take over because of the power-hungry hearts of man. So the government needed to be strong enough to curb man's passions, to set forth law, right? But the government had to be limited in nature to restrain the power of one central government. So there needed to be the restraint of power in the central government, but also enough law, enough order to curb man's passions so that there would be a government with laws. That our government be limited by a constitution, which would be a written document, not just, by the law of the land, that it would be written down, which it has by the Constitution, and that the republic would be a representative government of everyone. So He also set forth that in doing this, we need to divide the powers of three branches of our government. From the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, the power would be divided among the executive. First of all, the legislative to make the laws, the executive to make sure the laws are carried out, and the judicial to make sure the laws are constitutional. But these would be three branches where the power would be going to three different areas. Also, he also believed the federal government powers would be balanced by the state government and the local governments. So it'd be national, state, and local. Those three areas too of the federal government would balance. It would be a mixture of monarchy in a way, because he would have a president, but also a mixture of the aristocracy and democracy all in one bundle. So he believed good government was impossible apart from morality and virtue among citizens. He said if we don't have morality, if we don't have virtue, and we only get them through the Lord Jesus Christ, right, that this government would not work, and neither would any government work. He says, I go on this great Republican principle that people will have virtue and intelligence to select men of virtue and wisdom. Is there no virtue among us? If there not be, we are in a wretched situation. Basically, he's saying that we need virtue. Good. There will be no theological or theoretical checks, or no form of government will render us secure at all unless we have virtue. To suppose that any form of government will secure liberty or happiness without virtue in the people is a chimerical idea. We do not depend on their virtue or put confidence in our relics, but in the people who chose them. So he's basically saying, if we are trying to secure freedom, liberty, and happiness without any virtue, then we're just a joke. It's just a joke, because there will be no happiness, there will be no freedom without the virtue of the Lord Jesus Christ, right? Madison believed society was made up of individuals and groups that were seeking their own self-interest. The purpose of government is therefore to act as a referee among these conflicting interests. So he said, society is going to come in, you're going to have all kinds of individuals with all kinds of groups and all kinds of different self-interests. So the government needs to referee, and the Constitution needs to be what we need to look towards as a referee among these. And so the government must be balanced, it must be checked, it must be curbed, it must be divided and restrained so as to keep any one official or any one group having too much power. So the government must what? Be balanced. It must be checked, checks and balances. It must be curbed and divided and restrained. And that's what he put forth in the Constitution, so that we would have checks and balances between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, between the federal, state, and local governments, and between our elements of monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy, meaning the higher and the lower classes, all balancing each other. So Madison's views were shared also by other people. So not just he himself, but Alexander Hamilton believed, and actually James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, they became loyal Federalists and actually wrote the Federalist Papers together. And John Adams and George Washington. George Washington supported Madison's the Constitution, and so did John Adams, and many others, including Thomas Jefferson, would stand for James Madison as he put together as the father of our Constitution, and they would share his views. So Madison, Hamilton, and John Jay actually went together and put together the Federalist Papers, and these papers were to defend the new Constitution to the public, and that's what James Madison did. James Madison believed in the strong guarantee of religious freedoms and religious liberty. So as we see here, you can read over the whole thing on James Madison. I think this is very important, so that you know much about the Constitution from the former of the Constitution, or the father of the Constitution, I should say. So let's go here. Let's go on here. You can read that over again. And let's go on to, we went over this in the last video, so I'm not going to go over any of this here. Of course, Benjamin Franklin there. Let's go on. I'm going to go on to the questions, I think, are the next thing that here are the signers of the Constitution. I love this too. You see the signers of the Constitution now. Now, we're not talking about the Declaration. That happened over 10 years before this, So we have the signers of the signers of the Constitution now, and that you have them, George Washington being number one, and soldier, surveyor, we have merchants, we have lawyers, lots of lawyers here, and all of these signers down, and you can go over where they're from Virginia, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, all the states that were the 13 colonies, now 13 states, have signed the Constitution. These are the names that appear on there, all of their names. And we look at their vast ministers, statesmen, lawyers, farmers, doctors, they're all on here, inventors, authors, diplomats, statesmen, all of these very prestigious, each and every one. And we see as they came together to sign our Constitution. Here is the ratification of the Constitution. That means when the states decided to say, yes, our state will accept the Constitution. They had to have 9 states. Who was the 9th state? New Hampshire, you see on the list there. New Hampshire, on June 21st, 1788, was the 9th state which ratified the Constitution. But after New Hampshire, the other states, Virginia and New York, basically Virginia being, James Madison, the father of the Constitution, was a Virginian, for goodness sake, and so was Thomas Jefferson. But Virginia and New York both needed to, in order to ratify the Constitution, they needed a Bill of Rights to be attached to the Constitution, giving individual rights to people of America. So after the Bill of Rights was formed, and James Madison was instrumental in that too. But after the Bill of Rights was put together, Virginia, New York, North Carolina, and Rhode Island all ratified easily the Constitution. And that was the first Bill of Rights for those first 10. Right now we have a few others added to that over the centuries, right? So the ratification of the Constitution is there. You see Delaware being the first one, Rhode Island being the last one to ratify the Constitution. So basically in 1789 is when they elected George Washington as president, and that's when the new Constitution came into full effect, is when we had a president. So before 1789, that decade before, we didn't have a president. We only had, basically had our articles of the Constitution with different leaders that were taking the lead in that point. So we didn't have our first president until 1789. We always forget about that. We think 1776, then George Washington became president. No, not until 1789. So we're talking about from 1776. We're talking about 13 years later, when the Constitution would come into effect. So let's go over the section review here. So your questions, section 2 review. What was the purpose of the meeting at Mount Vernon? Okay, the meeting at Mount Vernon. This is before the Constitution meeting, right? Mount Vernon, who lives in Mount Vernon? Who lived in Mount Vernon then? Was George Washington. So there was 2 states, Maryland and Virginia, and they were disputing or fighting over their rights of navigation on the Chesapeake Bay, the harbor there of the Chesapeake Bay. And so these 2 states got together at George Washington's house, and they were happy together. This is going really good. We should get more of our states together now. This is working well. And so the Mount Vernon meeting was kind of preliminary, thinking we can get together. States were able to get together. Where was the Constitutional Convention held, and when? That's number 2. It was held then. It went from Mount Vernon to Annapolis, where in Annapolis they couldn't do anything because only 5 states came. But Alexander Hamilton and James Madison looked forward to bringing forth the group together at the Constitutional Convention in where? Philadelphia at Independence Hall in 1787. They came together. This is, 11 years after the Declaration of Independence. So they're coming together and bringing together, looking for a new constitution. First, they wanted to amend the Articles of the Confederation and put forth, but they realized they needed a whole new way, a whole new constitution. So number 3. Who were the 2 most famous Americans to attend the Constitutional Convention? I hope you know. The 2 most famous people were George Washington. If George Washington wasn't there at the convention, that most of the states would not have supported the Constitution, because George Washington was a supporter, and of course Alexander Hamilton too was his son. And they were supporting the Constitution. George Washington, what was the other one? We already went over him. Benjamin Franklin. He was 81 years old, and he called everyone to pray. So, the 2 most famous were, of course, George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. Well, what happened to Thomas Jefferson? He was putting together the Declaration of Independence. What happened to John Adams? Well, John Adams, he wasn't there, although he sent his words, and he believed in the Constitution. He was in England at the time as a foreign minister in England from America. And, of course, Thomas Jefferson was in France as a foreign minister. So they weren't there. So and even in some of the patriots weren't there either, considering, Samuel Adams wasn't there, or Patrick Henry weren't there at that point. Patrick Henry was like, I'm not sure how this Constitution thing is going to go. They didn't want a powerful government like a king being in charge. So, number 4, who is known as the father of the Constitution? Oh, you know that, James Madison. And who wrote the final draft of the Constitution? So, you'd think James Madison did, but he had his secretary, Governor Morris, put together and wrote the final draft, taken from what James Madison had put together. So, and the other people there too, the other men there too, putting together. Governor Morris put it together. So, number 5, how is the Constitution a bundle of compromises? Okay, so it had to be the compromise between the states, because we had the southern states that were very into the plantation life and slavery, right? And then we have the northern states who were very much against slavery, so we'd have that issue. And so the bundle of compromises would focus mainly on this, so there would be a 3/5 compromise, is that the South would be allowed 3/5 their population, and slavery would not be an issue at this time, which would be a big compromise. But before this, the main compromise was called the Connecticut Compromise. And the Connecticut Compromise was basically to say, how are the states going to be represented? Are they going to go by population? Are we going to go by each state having 1 vote, or each state having 2 votes? And so they put together the 2 houses, the houses of the Senate. Each state would have 2 votes. Exactly. And then the lower house would be by population, is that the states with more population would have more representatives and more votes. And this was a great compromise, in the midst, called the reason it's called the Connecticut Compromise is because of because of the man bringing forth this compromise was actually, was it Roger Sherman? I shouldn't think of his name. Yeah. But anyway, he was from Connecticut. The guy that put it together was from Connecticut, so they called it the Connecticut Compromise. And all the states loved this. They would have two houses. One would be on population, the other would be on the senatorial state votes. So, representative votes, I should say, of the senators. So, why did the Federalists wish the new Constitution to be adopted? Okay, they wanted, who were the Federalist essays written by? They were written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. And they were looking for everyone to support the Constitution, the people to support the Constitution. So they brought forth these essays, which were miraculous, really. These essays are now, we even read them today on the Constitution. And so, in bringing these, the Federalists wished that the new Constitution be adopted, so they put together saying how we needed to have a central government or we wouldn't survive as a nation. And of course it was, who wrote them would be Alexander Hamilton. He wrote most of them, and James Madison, the father of our Constitution, and John Jay, who was the first of the Supreme Court. And they wrote these essays. Why were the Anti-Federalists reluctant to approve the new Constitution? Because it didn't have individual rights there. They needed to attach the Bill of Rights, which they did. So as we read, the Bill of Rights are so important in our Constitution now. And so the Anti-Federalists did their job in the midst of saying we need to have individual state rights too, and individual rights. Number 7, the last question. When did the new government begin to function? When George Washington was elected president unanimously in the spring of 1789. Up here it says he was inaugurated in the spring of 1789, and that's when our constitutional government, the new Constitution began to function. So we went over all of that, and so the next we'll be going into the next section. And we're going to talk about how what is in the Constitution and how it reacts, and we're talking about look at the Constitution and why is it so miraculous, in fact, so we're going to look more into the Constitution of the United States. Excuse me. Here's the example. Here's an example of We the People, Article 1 of the Constitution.